we have another very special guest to elaborate this picture, kind of on the ground, you might say. Our next speaker comes from a family who's been farming the land of California for generations. He is a leader in the national farm movement to bring back a commitment to keeping the farmer on the land and restoring our nation's true sovereignty in these policies. So I'm very happy to introduce Mr. Frank Endres.
You know, I have to hand it to Michael and some of the other people who have arranged this schedule and this symposium today. They had me come on right about when you're all hungry out there and want to go to lunch. The presentation that I'm going to make is one that we are showing to farmers all over the country. And the purpose of the presentation is to debunk some of the ideas that has misled the farm people, the food producers of this nation, for a number of years. And we call that Adventures in Facts. It is primarily designed to show at house meetings and general meetings like this, but it's mainly to explain to farmers that they don't need to be taking the low prices that they are getting today. One of the things that we are going to be talking about, and it's quite a buzzword today all over the country, and that is food security. They're all talking about food security. And they're concerned about the nation now losing our farmland. We've lost almost 1 million acres of farmland in the United States since the 1960s. And there's a lot of concern about preserving farmland, and they're passing ordinances. We have the Williamson Act here in California that gives farmers a break on their property taxes if they keep it in production, and different ordinances around the country that is trying to encourage farmers to stay on the farms and keep the farmland in production rather than selling it for development. The loss of our farmland amounts to 5,400 acres every day, or 200 acres an hour. It's a tremendous loss. A lot of the farmland that is being lost is not just the prime farmland surrounding cities and that sort of thing. There's a lot of farmland that's being lost out in the country to where there's really not much development. A land speculator will come out and, let's say, will buy up a nice 320-acre parcel of land, and the first thing he does to make a big profit on it is he'll divide it up into 20-acre parcels and sell it off. The first thing that happens is that the new owner will put a fence around his 20 acres. As soon as he does that, that land is no longer in production. It can't produce cattle, pasture, or food crops, because it's not practical to farm a little 20-acre parcel. So what we're saying is that if you want to preserve farmland, the number one thing you've got to do is save the farmer on the land first. It does no good to preserve the farmland if the farmer's going broke on the land. So that's what we're doing there. Big concern to the people is the aging of our is the farm population. Under 25, you can see that's only represented about 3% of the population. On the other end is people over 65 is 30% of the farm population. The farm population is aging. and the young people are not coming in to operate our farms. So what we're saying is that the farmer has to make a living off the land, and farm prices need to be at a parity level with the rest of the economy to encourage the young people to come in and take over the farms. One of the things that you've probably heard a lot about this year is the higher grain prices and the higher cattle prices and this sort of thing. And I clipped this article out of a farm paper, and it shows that the farm prices have risen 177% since 1991, and but also the costs have risen by 210%. Now, there's a little fallacy in this chart, and what it is back in 1991, our farm prices were not at 100% of parity. They were approximately 50% of parity back then. And if they would have shown that in this chart, that the spread on that thing would have been even greater. Most all businesses, as well as farming, have a formula, and that formula is production times price equals income. So any decrease in production or in price will drastically affect your income. And as you can see in this chart here, the production times 50% of the price, your income is reduced by 50%. Supply and demand is told that this is what governs our prices, and so what we'd like to do is show you how that's not working today. The world population today is approximately 7 billion inhabitants. The acres of farmland per capita is for the general population of the world is approximately 55 hundredths of an acre. That's a half an acre that is being used today to feed the population. And when you put that in context of what the world population is going to be, it's quite astounding. In the United States alone, the present population is around 315 million people. And the projection by the year 2050, which is only 37 years from now, they expect that our population is going to increase by another 100,000 people. Most all of our economic theory has been of supply and demand. This is what the farmers are told, that supply and demand is what governs your prices, and you dumb farmers, you overproduce every year, and so that's why you can't expect to get a decent price for your commodity or your animals, is because you just produce too much. That theory is taught in the colleges and universities like it's the theory of gravity. We throw a rock up and it falls down. Well, it's the same thing with the law of supply and demand. When your production goes up, naturally your prices are going to go down. See? That theory was originally formulated by a fellow by the name, I'm sure all of you have heard of, Adam Smith, back in the 1700s. He was what is known as a court economist. And we have court economists today that preach the same thing. But anyway, pull that back. Adam Smith was a favorite of the British Crown at that time because of all their colonies all over the world. You had to have some way of explaining why that they would literally steal the commodities from their colonies and take them back to England and remanufacture them and then attempt to sell them back to their colonies for exorbitant prices. And so they had to have some way of explaining that away to the colonists at that time, and so Adam Smith's theory fit quite well. And then when he couldn't explain it, he said that, well, there's an invisible hand in the marketplace that's controlling it. It almost makes it sound like it's something divine. It's coming down from the heavens, you know. So anyway, that's one theory of how farm prices are made, and the same thing is being pulled over the farmers' wool over their eyes today the same way. There's another important fact, and that is and to back up just a minute, Adam Smith, one thing they did let slip in one of his theories is that his theories only work when both parties to the transaction are dealing from a position of equal strength. And when you look at the British East India Trading Company that did all the trading for the colonies for the British Crown at that time, that most certainly wasn't equal strength. If any other country would attempt to go in and trade with some of their colonies on some of the major commodities, the British Empire would send their forces, their navy and their army in there and would stop them from doing trade with those colonies. But anyway, there's another man that was very significant because it, as a result of his efforts, produced what they call the golden era for agriculture. And that was the period from 1941 until 1952. Carl Wilkin was a farmer back in Iowa. And he had training from one of the colleges and university, and he really liked the getting into economics. And he found that agriculture has a multiplier, as do all segments of our economy. But agriculture had the highest. It had the highest multiplier. And he found that for every dollar that's generated on the farms, that the national economy ended up with $7 of new wealth. And when he found this, he became a one-man evangelist, so to speak, and spent countless hours all over the country putting seminars on to show how this operated. And so when in 1941, when the war broke out and Pearl Harbor was bombed, within a couple of days they passed the National Defense Act. There was such a fever to go to war at that time. He got 13 state secretaries of agriculture together in Washington, and he took a one-day seminar, and he showed them why that we need to have parity prices for agriculture, because we need to, number one, we got to feed the nation as well as the military. We got to produce the food for the war effort. But more importantly, we have got to produce the income to pay for this tremendous war effort. And so as a result of that, he got Senator Stegall, here it's a coincidence again, Senator Stegall to tack on to the National Defense Act what is called the Stegall Amendment, that simply stated that all farm commodities would be priced at 100% of parity. And because of that, they were able to stabilize agriculture, encourage food production, and also to pay for the war effort at that time. And this act went from 1941 until 1952, at which time it was repealed. And the fact that there was no farmers involved in getting that act passed at that time there was little effort to keep it in motion, and so it was repealed, and they substituted for sliding scale parity. And when that happened, the farm prices just began to skid downhill. And what's interesting to note, that during that time period from 41 to 1952, it caused a depression in one segment of our economy. Would anybody guess what that is? It was the banking industry. The bankers could only loan out 16% of their money. Why? The farmers, which is the biggest industry in the country, didn't have to borrow from one year to the next to plant their crops or anything else. That it was paid for by the income off their farms. And so the farmers and the people in rural areas were depositing money in the bank and taking interest from the banker. And then in 1952, when the law was rescinded, in 1 year, the loan-to-deposit ratio in banks jumped to 32%. So, okay. Very, very hard to see this, but basically what that is, if you got a real sharp eyesight, I can't even see it myself there. But anyway, basically what this is, I took out of the government statistics book put out by the Department of Agriculture, and these are this is the parity prices, and it just shows basically what that is, but during that time period. And it jumped right in that time period from 1941 until 52, and that established a foundation for all the farms in this country that were established in that generation, and set the stage for all the farmers at that time to establish themselves. Something very interesting that happened during that period also, that the troops that returned from the war, many of them wanted to establish farms and go and be a farmer. They could go out and buy a farm, and if they were good farmers, they could pay for that farm from the crops that they would raise and sell. So this helped establish the farm population at that time, that they could go out and make a living in rural America. The prices received index, that's just a gauge of what they are receiving on the parity scale. Parity, everybody uses parity in our economy, everybody, but they just call it a little different name. For farmers, it's parity. For college, university teachers and professors, firemen, policemen, and so on, it's cost of living wage. And so with a farmer, the cost of living wage for a farmer is called parity. Okay? And if you're receiving 100% parity for your crops and your cattle, then that is a full, fair wage, comparing your cost of the selling price of your commodities compared to what your input costs are to raise it. That's simply what parity is. And this chart here, I know it's very hard to see that, is very bad. Lately now it's dropped down on the average to about 50% of parity, and that does not encourage the young people to go into agriculture, and it does not encourage the farmers to keep their land if they can sell it for development or whatever. Some people say, well, gosh, if you would, and basically what you're asking here is that we're going to have to double the price of our commodities to bring it to 100% parity. And what you're saying is, my God, how can we can barely afford our food right now. How are you going to double the price? And this is really difficult to see. Turn to the next slide there. I took 4 major commodities out of there, and just to show you how small of an increase that is. Bread, 1 pound loaf of bread that retails $2.99, the farmer only gets 18 cents out of that for the basic raw material that's in it. 1 gallon of milk is $3.88. The farmer gets $1.71 out of that, and he needs it. Dairyman desperately needs to double that price. That needs to be doubled. But you're only talking about the basic raw material that's going to change, not the entire cost, you see. This is where people have been misled on the consuming side on what these prices will mean. Let's see, you got the sirloin steak there, retail was $7.99. The farmer only got $2.01 out of that. And the more processed the food commodity, like cereal, for an example, the greater the disparity is. Retail there on cereal there is $5.49. The farmer only got 12 cents out of that. The 12 cents is the only part that we're talking about needs to be increased, not the entire thing. Okay. The top processors in the period from 1995 to 2010, 43% of the 95 was 43% of the dairy processing sales by co-ops. By 2010, there were no top 4 were cooperatives anymore. These are all large corporations that are doing the processing now. Okay, next. Of the top processors in 1995, their 10% of sales were from foreign-owned companies. In 2010, 2 foreign companies in the top 4 were foreign-owned. Next. This is really shocking here. This is the consumption of beef in this country. We have an assessment that's made against all of us beef producers. We pay $1 a head to this promotional board, to get people to eat more beef, and the theory is that it's going to raise your price then if you get people to eat more beef. Well, the price of the consumption of beef, as you can see on this chart, has steadily been increasing. It dropped off a little bit in 2010 or so, but it was mainly because of the recession, and that's what caused that to drop off. Okay, next. Now, the bottom line there is the production of beef in this country. And at no time in there do those lines touch. In other words, what we're doing is we are consuming more beef than we're producing in this country. If supply and demand had anything to do, like Adam Smith said, that supply and demand governs your price, the cattlemen should be doing very well for themselves, and they're not. We're losing cattlemen and cattle ranches all over the United States now because of the low price of beef compared to what their production costs are. The wheat and feed grains, we're not just taking one grain, we're taking all 7 of the major grains in this chart. And basically what it is, we total it up and averaged the consumption of grains in this country, and it shows for a 50-year period, we are consuming an average of 102% of our total production. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute. How can that be? How can you consume 102% of your total production? What they do is we adjust the imports and the exports to make up for that. So that's what that comes from. Next. That's more of the same thing. Now this is the grain inventory. At the end of each year, we have what they call a carryover of grain into the next year. And the latest that we actually have the figures for is the year 2011. See, because you have to go around through the whole year. It's kind of like the rainfall records. You got to go around through into the next year before you can come up with a total figure. And the carryover in terms of consumption represents 37.68 days supply. That's all we have. That's all we have left over at the end of the year. Now, if you'll note that was in 2011. This is not taking in 2012 yet. Now, 2012, that hasn't come around yet, the full crop year, that represents the drought year in the Midwest. So that figure, I think, will probably be cut in half when heaven forbid if we have another drought in the Midwest. We're dangerously close in this country, and food security is a real concern. I think that covers most of what I would like to present. It goes on here for quite a while, and I know you people want to get out and get something to eat now.